Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Mantle, physical therapist. Last week, we connected around learning when we talked about the visual vestibular system. In that moment, Gretchen asked me if I might share my thoughts about posture and breathing and arousal. So here we go. Let's talk about breath first. Breathing is actually a fairly unique function because it is under both the automatic control from our respiratory centers in our brainstem, and it is also under our conscious control. With every inhale, we have a net activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And with every exhale, we have a net activation of our parasympathetic nervous system. So we have the body's way of balancing that sympathetic and parasympathetic balance for regulation. Now, when we take that inhale, that sympathetic nervous system upregulates, and then we take the exhale and the parasympathetic nervous system upregulates. They're not exactly equal. There's always a little bit more sympathetic nervous system activation because that arousal and alertness is what keeps us alive. However, it is based on the assumption that the diaphragm is being optimally recruited at that point in order to have that nice balance with every breath. So the diaphragm, as you may remember, is again a unique muscle. It is one of the primary muscles of respiration, and it's not linear like the bicep or the quads. It is a dome, right? And it lives in the bottom of the rib cage, and it has its muscle fibers that originate at the periphery, and then they all come in towards the central tendon and they insert on that central tendon. So when those muscle fibers contract, the diaphragm goes from a dome shape and it flattens and descends, and it pushes out those lower ribs, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. What happens with that optimal recruitment of the diaphragm is that full descent and flattening. Now, that happens when we are in an optimal alignment. One of the first things PTs learn at PT school is about that length tension curve relationship that tells us that a muscle is best recruited in its mid range. Well, we understand that when we think about the biceps or the quads, but we also can understand that when we think about the diaphragm. So, alignment or posture has a lot to do with how well we can recruit the diaphragm. And we can demonstrate that really easily right now. I'll bet a lot of you are slumped over in that universal posture that we all understand while you're listening to this video, and that's okay. Don't change your posture. Just go ahead and take a breath and see whether or not that breath feels free and easy, or whether or not it's a little bit tougher. That's not unlike lots of our kids who, as soon as they sit down, they collapse. They are in that slump posture. That has them having difficulty optimally recruiting their diaphragm. The other end of that spectrum is children who are stuck in that sympathetic dominance, fight or flight, with all of its global extension. And they also, in that posture, do not recruit their diaphragm very well, right? Those alignments obviously impact the length tension curve for the diaphragm, and they negatively impact its optimal recruitment. And that has fallout. It has fallout for arousal and for that balance in the autonomic nervous system. And it also has fallout for postural control. Okay, so what we want optimally, we've discovered, is what we call in dynamic core for kids, we call dynamic neutral. So we want a neutral pelvis, and we want a neutral rib cage, and we want them stacked over top of one another. That is what we call dynamic neutral. That allows us to optimally recruit the diaphragm for both arousal and for postural control. And here's the last thing I'll leave you with today. We've learned a little new tidbit of information about heart rate variability. As you may know, heart rate variability is one of the ways that we measure how stressed or how anxious a person is. The higher their heart rate variability, the better. What we understand now is being able to take a breath in for 5 seconds and the breath out for 5 seconds positively impacts heart rate variability. So you can go ahead and choose some different postures. Try to inhale and exhale for 5 seconds each in a slump posture. Try and put yourself way into extension and inhale for 5 seconds and exhale for 5 seconds. And then try and find that middle range where you think you've got a neutral pelvis and a neutral rib cage and they're stacked over each other. And then try and repeat that 5 second inhale and 5 second exhale. I think that you'll find that as you approach dynamic neutral, that activation of the diaphragm and the ability to inhale and exhale for 5 seconds becomes a lot easier. And that is our connections between posture, arousal, breath, and postural control.